Hey, Stacey David here, and this is the Tales of a Gearhead podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Cornwell Tools, the choice of professionals since 1919. That's right, over 100 years building tools and still going strong. If you need tools, check them out. You won't be disappointed. All right, let's get rolling. All right, I've got a question about a truck here from Ben. And Ben says, "Hi, Stacey. I have a question. Hopefully you'll be able to go into detail on the podcast. I have a 2011 Ram 1500. It's an Express, like the Dragon Wagon that you built on the show. And he says, I have a debate with my buddy about making it into something that Ram didn't make, but I think that they should have. He said, you made yours into the Dragon Wagon, and he said Ram came out with the RT later, and I was thinking, what if they made a Super B truck like they did in the 60s with the car? What would that look like? Now, he says, my buddy says that you're making a clone, or it's something that it's not, but he says Ram never made a Super B 1500. He said, so am I a pretender trying to make something, that's a clone, or is it more of a thought experiment? Or is there a potential? Is this to be interesting? I need some advice here. All right, Ben, that's a really good question, and on so many levels. So let me dig into this a little bit. First of all, I love the way your imagination is thinking, and that's a good thing. However, Dodge actually did make a Super B truck. It was called the Rumblebee, and we actually had the prototype for it back on the truck show many, many years ago. Probably about 2003 was when we had it on there, because they came out with the truck in 2004, and I think they did it 2004 and 2005, and it was called the Dodge Ram Rumblebee 1500. Had the Hemi in it, and the idea was that it would compete with the Ford Lightning. And that particular truck, it had the little Bumblebee with the helmet on, a modified graphic that they put on the Rumblebee car. They were cool trucks, and they have a collectability to them. Unfortunately, it was not up to the task of handling the Ford Lightning, man. The Ford Lightning was a force to be reckoned with. Still the best muscle truck out there. SVT really nailed it on that one. And, Dodge wasn't quite all the way into the game yet, so they just kind of underpowered the Bee to be able to compete with the Lightning. But the truck did exist, and you can Google this. You can look them up. You can see what they look like. They were yellow with black stripes, single cab, cool-looking truck. So if you do something that has a Super B flavor, just make sure you don't call it a Rumblebee. You don't get into the area that it would make it a clone. If you want to do something Super B-ish to your truck, feel free to do that. Just be aware that what's out there, and some people might come up and think that it is a Rumblebee. But then, as long as you know that, now you'll go, and use your imagination and make the truck that you want. Now, Dodge also did another concept in 2013 of the Rumblebee. Now, that truck never went into production. You can look it up, Google that. Looks very similar to the 04 trucks, just a different body style. Once again, it was a really cool concept. I kind of wish they would have built it. So there's a lot of people thinking down the lines that are out there. Now, keep in mind right now, that is where especially Dodge is making all of their cool vehicles. They're going back and they're mining their own history. So like the Hellcats, you have these Daytonas coming out, and you have these RTs, and they're going back and pulling those old names. And so Dodge themselves are doing that. And, Ford's doing it as well. Chevrolet's doing it. They go back and do a modern version of those classic cars to try to pull those collectors and stuff. And that's okay. They have the right to do that. It's their vehicle. But if you are going to do something kind of down the same line, keep in mind that how people may look at that. You might have your version of it, and they're like, well, one of those exists. And then you're not even into a clone thing. You're just kind of into, well, what is it? All of that being said, I would encourage you to sit down, decide what the truck would look like if you did it, and then make sure you're doing something that is quite different than like a factory option or something, so people know this is your version of what a Super B would look like. And I would actually take it somewhere, and I'd go another route and call it the Wasp. Get away from the bee thing. If you want to stay with something that stings, call it the Stinger. tick off all the Corvette guys. That kind of stuff. That's fair game. But the bottom line, make the truck your own. If you're doing it to try to resell it, always be aware of what might have already been done. Hope this helps, man. Good luck to you, Ben. When gearheads get together, it isn't long until the subject of tools comes up. Because tools are what make all this possible. You guys know that. And car guys and girls are passionate about tools. What's good and what is bad. And that is one thing that I have to give Cornwell a lot of credit for. They'll listen to what the pros are saying about their tools and constantly make changes to build them better. That's why they have new screwdriver handles and ratchets and all kinds of other stuff coming out all the time. It's not just to get your money, which a lot of people think. It's the never-ending quest to build a better tool. Because Cornwell knows that if you're not working and getting paid, they're not getting paid. That's why they're America's oldest tool company and still going strong. Check them out. Now here's a cool question. The guy writing in says, "Hey Stacey, I understand that you're a musician and a guitar player." He says, "What was your first guitar?" I'm like, okay, is that my first good guitar or just my first guitar? I started pretty much like everybody else, man. I started on a borrowed guitar, man, that my parents borrowed because they wanted to know if I was serious. And my parents still have that guitar. I just said, don't you dare get rid of it. I mean, it is beat up. Because, you used to sit there as a kid, bored with practice time, so you start noodling with the guitar, like with a pick and running it up and down the wood. And it's got all kinds of marks and chips, and pretty soon people were digging on it with a knife and putting your initials in it because you saw somebody else do that. Anyway, so that was my first guitar that I actually learned on. Then my first electric, of course, I was a Chuck Berry, B.B. King fan, so I had to have that big arch top thing. So my first electric was a Harmony Rocket. Well, because Rocket. And it had more buttons than any other guitar. It had these big white buttons that went all the way around the guitar. And then it had 3 pickups, and it was a single cutaway arch top. And those have actually become pretty collectible. I've tried to find one again. I'd like to have one just to hang it on the wall. It was just an average guitar. But man, I thought it was awesome. And, I didn't know anything about sounds or anything. I just, the pickups, I didn't really understand all that stuff. I just knew that they all sounded different. And so I played that for a while. And then my first good electric that my dad got for me was a Gibson SG. It was a really good guitar. He had got it from his brother, who had bought it for their kids, and they didn't want to play. So Dad got it really cheap because those Gibsons were not cheap. But I was really fortunate. My dad was one of those sort of guys, and he always instilled within me that get the best tools that you can, the best equipment, if you're serious about it. Because, there's a certain mentality. I remember, playing on borrowed guitars and stuff. I was never that serious. As soon as somebody puts a real instrument in front of you, you almost have to live up to it. And it kind of changes your outlook on it. And that's why I tell people all the time, man, if you're going to get tools, get good ones. You don't have to get a lot of them. Just don't get the cheap Taiwanese stuff that's going to break on you or be an issue. Be something you can be proud of and work up from there. It's the same thing. It's the same thing with, any equipment that you can buy. I always try to get the best I can afford. Now, I'm not saying go out and get something you can't afford, but you always want something that, that you want to play and something you want to spend time with and something that sounds good. So anyway, that was my first guitars, and I don't have any of them anymore except that old Yamaha. Parents still have that, but I got rid of the SG, right after I moved to Nashville. Had to get into a Stratocaster. That was the starting into the single coil thing. So the old SG went down the road. One question that people like to ask is like, how did you make the transition from the music world to the automotive world? And, there really wasn't that much of a transition there. I was messing with cars from my earliest memories. And, I started playing guitar when I was 6. And before that, I was strumming on baseball bats and, tennis rackets on the back of the piano when Mom would play songs and stuff. So those two things always went hand in hand for me, and I was always doing them both, just at different levels. In other words, when I was a professional musician, playing at Opryland or playing on the road or in sessions or whatever, I was still working on cars. I was just doing it for me. And then when I opened my shop and started doing that, I was doing them both for a while. And then it got to the point, keep in mind, I had started playing professionally at 15 years old. And when I say professionally, in other words, that's when I started getting paid to do it, which generally is supposed to make you a professional. So I've been doing it for a long time, and I'd seen a lot in the music industry, and had seen a lot of what I didn't want to do and what I did want to do. And I was just seeing a lot of people that, would reach a certain point in their life, and they hadn't put any money away. The music industry is a little bit like sink or swim, feast or famine. And even if you're on the road with a big artist, you make good money, and then you're off for a while. So, it's kind of back and forth, and there's ways to get around that, but you have to be proactive, and most are not. Most musicians aren't. They're kind of there for the party, and that party ends, unfortunately. Anyway, so I made the transition over there. I had gotten the job, I'd been offered the job to do the truck show, and the ironic thing is that, like, right about the same time that I was offered the job on trucks, a friend of mine called me up and he says, "Hey, there's an audition here," and he said, "I really think you'd be great for this band." And it was the Dixie Chicks. For those that don't know, the Dixie Chicks had been kind of kicking around the Nashville area for almost 10 years. Now, it was not the Dixie Chicks as you knew them that actually had the success, but it were different girls, different band, and they kind of did a Texas swing kind of thing, and wore the frilly outfits and the hats, and it was more of a novelty thing. But at that point, they had been redone, and they had been put together with the current group. But anyway, it was funny because we watched their career. It was always cool because they exploded on the scene and actually had some really good records. And then prime example of their politics getting involved, and of course everybody knows what happened to the Dixie Chicks. But it was an interesting thing. I always watched that and kind of was hoping that they would have some success. But anyway, so that was kind of the last audition, the last thing that I was offered, and then it was full-on trucks and full-on car stuff. Now, I still do a lot with the music industry and still have a lot of friends in there, except now when I play, it's for fun. I don't have to do something that I don't want to do for money, which is a good place to be. One question that usually comes up when I'm out at events and stuff, that people, they know that I was in the music industry for a long time. They're like, who have you met and what are some of those stories? Oh, there's a lot of them, man. I'll tell you what, when I first moved to town, you'll get a kick out of this. I was driving a 65 fastback Mustang, 4-speed. It was green. It was a cool car, man. I drove that from Idaho to Nashville, and I moved here in 84. I lived right down the road with some people. I was just, basically living in their guest room until I could get a job and a place to live myself. But they were not too far down the road from Johnny Cash and Roy Orbison and some of these guys, Conway Twitty, out in Hendersonville at the time. First of all, I was a big Johnny Cash fan, and I just wanted to meet him and, maybe work for him. I just thought that would be really cool. And so I was driving by his house one time, and I noticed Johnny had this really cool house on the lake, and then he had like this armed guard, and it said, "Warning, armed guard," and you can see the guy down there with the gun on and the uniform. And it was down in the lower garage. And then there was like an upper garage. It wasn't even a garage. It was just a driveway that went to the very front door of the house. And so there were two gates. And usually the lower gate right there where the security guard, that was the one that was open. Of course, I didn't want to drive in there because I wasn't invited. So anyway, I'm driving by there. And I noticed that every once in a while that upper gate would be open with no guard, where you could just drive right to the front of the house. So I'm thinking, could be an opportunity. Well, at the time, now you can't just walk up to the door and go, "Hey, is Johnny here?" So I was like, I got to have some sort of reason to go up there. So at the time, at one of the churches that I was going to, the youth was trying to, raise money. So they were like, hey, go get people to sponsor you for this free throw contest that we're having, a buck a free throw or $2 or 50 cents or whatever. And I'm like, okay, I might as well take part of this. Well, now I have like a legitimate reason, right? So now I'm driving by there 2 or 3 days, and I'm not even really sure I'm going to do this, but I'm sitting there, I didn't have anything to lose. If you know anything about me, I'm that sort of person. And so anyway, one day, I've got my sheet there with me. The gate's open. Here it is. You're going to do it or you're not going to do it? And I wheel right in there. Wheel right up to the front of Johnny Cash's house in my green 65 fastback, glass packs rumbling. And I get out and I walk to the door and, because everything in me is like, turn around right now. Get off this property. Somebody is going to salt your backside with 12 gauge, man. So I hit the door and I knock on the door and I'm expecting a housekeeper or somebody, I am not expecting Johnny Cash to open the door. And that's exactly what happened. Johnny Cash throws open the door, and there he stands. Now, let me give you everything that went through my mind in this 5 seconds. First of all, Johnny Cash is a big dude. I had no idea he was this big. He was like 6'5" or 6'6", and then he wore those boots. So the guy's about 6'8", and he's all in black, and he's just a commanding presence. So it's like Dracula just opened the door. So he's looking at me, and all I can hear is the record that my dad used to play when I was a kid over and over and over, Folsom Prison Blues, where he comes out and he goes, "Hello, I'm Johnny Cash." That's all I can hear. I almost say it to him. I hear it in my head. So I'm looking up at him, and all I hear is, "Hello, I'm Johnny Cash." And honestly, for the first time in my life, I was truly, for a split second, speechless. I didn't know what to say. And he kind of looked at me, and so he goes, "Yeah?" And so fortunately, I had my piece of paper there, and I'm like mumbling. It's like, "Oh, yeah, there's this church, and there's free throws, and the kind of thing." And he's looking at me like, okay, first of all, how did you end up on my doorstep the 5 seconds I left the gate open? And what the heck is wrong with you? Anyway, so he laughs, and he actually sponsored me $1 a shot. He goes, "Yeah, put me down for $1 a shot." And he signs it, and I wish I would have kept it. It was a really cool thing. And that was, like I said, the first time that I met him. Now, years later, I met his daughter, Cindy Cash, on a photo shoot. We became good friends. So I had the time, several days to spend with Johnny, just he and I. And those are completely different stories. Really cool guy. But I never brought that up. I was almost afraid to, because I didn't want him to look at me and go, I used to think you were okay, but you're that guy. I told Cindy about it, and she was like, he probably admired the heck out of you. He said the fact that you just came up and did that. But anyway, that's my Johnny Cash story, at least the first one. All right, that wraps it up for us today. Make sure that you check out the Gears TV website. We got all kinds of cool stuff there. We got a couple new die casts coming out. Got some books coming out. We have all kinds of things going on. But the most important thing is get out there and turn some wrenches yourself. Get a project. If you don't have one, start working on it. And if you don't have tools, check out Cornwell. They can help you out there. Also, don't forget to check out Gears on Gears Nation, Amazon, Mav TV, and Motor Trend. All right, we'll see you down the road.